Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Hillary Raimo, and I'm sitting here today in a new Zoom talk with Brooks Agnew, researcher, author, radio host extraordinaire. And we're going to be talking today about the coronavirus, the pandemic, things going on in the world. And he's going to be offering us his opinion and perspective on things that are happening. So I hope you sit here and listen along and share this video so you can pass it on and we can have some clarity, hopefully, about all of these fabulous things. Welcome, Brooks. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Hillary. This is I love getting together with you. You're a super busy person, and I see your posts every now and then, but it's really a rare opportunity for us to come together and talk like this, and I really, really appreciate the chance.
Well, I enjoy my conversations with you. They have always been thought-provoking. We muse on some great topics. We ponder questions that people don't normally ask. And it's refreshing, I believe, to be in a conversation type setting like this and to muse over all of these extraordinary moments that are happening now. One of the things that have been crossing my mind lately as I watch the world and what's going on is how we need to rise up and remember who we really are as far as conscious beings go, and how we can use our consciousness and spirituality and light to lift up the fear pandemic that's really happening. What are your thoughts on that?
When I was growing up, I had parents that tried to do their best. They were busy too in those days, but eventually, we went to church every now and then on the important days anyway. And when I raised my kids, I resolved, I'm going to go to church every Sunday. I'm going to give my kids some kind of base to come in on. And so, part of our culture is that at least one day a week, we have this spiritual set aside. It's okay to go listen to hymns or the gospel or whatever it is that you listen to when you get together with your people at worship. But the rest of the time, it's business as usual. We spend, 6.5 days sinning and half a day trying to fix it and bring it back to zero. But that hasn't really worked in the last couple of decades. What has happened is the race of mankind has become so prolific now. We're close to 8 billion people on the earth. The space between us electronically has shrunk to nothing. We're electronically linked to one another. So we're not really able to isolate totally ourselves from other people. I know people that can't leave the house without their cell phone. They just feel crippled. They feel hobbling and disconnected from the rest of the world. So this has caused, I think, a spiritual intertwining of people. And now we're realizing that in reality, we cannot separate our spiritual selves from our everyday selves. And this has caused a schism. It's caused the race of mankind, I call it the grand division. Some people want to remain victims. They want to remain in darkness. They want to remain cared for by some, all-powerful benefactor. Others feel very empowered. Like, hey, wait a minute. I'm really self-employed in this equation. I don't care if I work for someone else. I'm working for myself. And I'm working for self-improvement and self-increase of my ability. And what's happened is the race of mankind has now divided. And the division is becoming more and more and more. And we're seeing it not only in elections, but we're seeing it in lifestyles. And we're seeing it in political parties. We have seen one party say, well, we're going to gather up all the victims and we're going to make a party out of that. And the other one has said, well, we're going to take all the people who want to be free and who want to reach the fullness of the measure of their creation, and we're going to make a political party out of that. And we're so close to being the same. I mean, it's like we're only 3, maybe 4% apart. And the earth is in this equation as well. This is kind of parenthetical. Let me put this in here. When Operation Corona Scare went into full effect and everything got locked down, okay, all the factories shut off, all the trains stopped, all the plane landings lowered to almost nothing, all the big factories and presses and hammers and everything, the planet got quiet. The seismologists were saying, hey, guess what we're measuring? Just the Earth. We're not measuring all the vibrations from mankind. So it confirmed your idea and my idea that we humans have a vibrational symbiotic relationship with planet Earth. Our vibrations and the vibrations of the Earth affect one another. And when we have a dark, negative, hateful effect on the Earth has an allergic reaction to us. And now there's a whole lot of us on this planet. So our vibrational signature is enormous. And now we've been able to confirm that. So here we are, half of us being dark and fearful and afraid to go outside and afraid to get the flu and all victims up and down. And the other half of us walking around without a mask, a smile on our face, looking for love and looking to do great things with our lives. And the Earth, I think, is confused. It doesn't know what to do with us right now.
It is quite amazing how we are watching the absence of human activity and how it increases health for the planet. You see pictures where pollution has dispersed, animals are coming out, looking around going, what happened to them all?
Look at the river Ganges. You've been to Nepal, haven't you?
I was supposed to be in India this March and my trip got canceled. It would have been my first visit. So I have not been to that part of the world yet.
Every time I go to Nepal, the thing that comes back to me as soon as you get there is the smell, the odor. When you take the bridges over the Ganges, over the Ganga River in there, it smells like death. You know what death smells like a rotting horse. This is what the whole river smells like. But I saw a picture of it last week. They say the river's drinkable. All the factories and all the people and everything that used to flood that river with commerce and trash and sewage and chemicals, it's all stopped. And the river has cleansed itself. Pretty remarkable.
And it didn't take that much time.
No.
So it makes me wonder some of the conversations that have happened over the years where we project so much time needed to do the benefit of cleaning up the planet, yet it's only taken a month to do that. And so seeing that, then aren't we really looking at a moment where we have to consider in the rebuild that we have to go more green, that we have to stop more pollution? I mean, this is really a testament to everybody who's ever argued that we are contaminating the planet.
Well, it's a testament to the way that America has tried to take care of the land and the rivers and the trees and the mountains and govern, we don't hunt everything to extinction. We don't cut all the trees down and then go, wow, where are all the trees? If the rest of the world would just take out the trash and learn how to take care of their sewage, the world would be a much better place. Absolutely. Well, there are very few places you can go in the United States where the environment's totally trashed. It's pretty clean. Everywhere you go, the trash is picked up, the lawns are mowed, the sewage is working, water treatment plants are working, refrigeration works. There's a big difference in the way we care for the environment, we care for the land, and other countries care for their land. Look at Norway, look at Sweden, look at Finland. They're pristine clean. But you go to Asia, Malaysia, parts of China. I've audited plants in China, in Wuhan. I went to a truck plant where they were painting trucks and shipping them, and I wanted to audit the plant. And I said, so where's the sludge treatment center? I want to see your waste treatment center, where the overspray from the vehicles is gathered by an undercurrent of water, and then it's filtered and incinerated. And it's the way we do it here in this country. They were just running it over the hill into the river. Paint sludge with toluene and MEK and all these heavy metals in it. And they'd been doing it forever, ever since they made trucks there. Crazy pollution.
And yet here we are all in lockdown and the factories have stopped. And it reminds me of the movie The Lorax, where you have the factory going and all the pollution coming out. And we have to really look around and question some of our actions. What do you think we're discovering as human species in general when it comes to this? I know there's talk of separation and fragmentation and people going into different categories of belief systems and wants and so on. We seem to be prone to that. You know, we seem to be hardwired to pick and choose a side and stay there and be a cheerleader for that side and be against whatever isn't.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
as we look around and we feel completely politicalized all over the place, you know, take one side, pick and choose, who are you for? Yet we're all sitting home and watching our planet clear up, and it gives me a lot of hope. Gives me a lot of hope. I feel very strong. We're not contained when it comes to consciousness. You know, our consciousness has the ability to move. Our mind has the talents and skill sets to be able to do that. And so perhaps we're being asked to use those skill sets more often, don't you think?
Yes. And I want to just comment on the first part of what you said, that we're being sort of indoctrinated. We're being conditioned to hate one thing or another thing. You know, scientists, we have a tendency, well, we're built to question everything. In fact, there's no such thing as settled science. Science means to ask questions. And it means also when you ask the questions, you're going to make observations. You're going to collect experimental data. The data is going to line up or not line up with a hypothesis, one or the other. But it allows us to be rather analytical, rather, I would say, aseptic in our ability to collect and treat data. If we do it wrong, it can be seen pretty easily as being manipulated. And when I look at what's happened to the planet the last 12 weeks, for instance, the forces at work here are tremendously powerful. In my book, Charm of Favor, I talk about them, but I never really thought that they'd be manifested like this. Anytime you have a military operation, the first thing that you do as a military command is you sit down and discuss two things. What is the problem? State the problem clearly. And what is the objective? And the objectives are a matter of command, considering the environment, the methods, the results, the whether you're going to use lethal or non-lethal weaponry, all these things, or psyops, have to be considered. And when I think about the global syndicate, and I'm talking about a force that has been ruling the world for thousands and thousands of years, and they've lost control of the world since America became a power. Nowhere in any scripture ever written was America predicted. There was no government ruled by the people. There was no freedom of speech. That was not written down anywhere. This is new. And it's also not controlled by the global syndicate. So the global syndicate had a problem. And the problem was that the world was onto their game. France was protesting, Malaysia was protesting, Iran was protesting, Hong Kong was protesting, we were protesting. The entire world was rebelling against the global syndicate, and they were losing the narrative in the court of public opinion. They gassed them, they beat them, they shot them, and nothing would stop them. So that was the problem. Problem number one. Problem number two was this stupid thing called America First. For crying out loud, we had the whole American continent on its knees. It was broke. It was out of money. It had high inflation, high employment. Nobody was working. We had them right where we wanted them. And now they're back. So how do we solve these two problems? We create a weapon that is so frightening that it drives every sane person into their homes where they will not come out. So they created Operation Corona Scare. An ordinary flu, yes, it infects very quickly, but has a very low mortality rate, and it's easily treated. These are the facts of the case. But the objective was to crush the global protesting and to smash the Trump economy. And they did both in 21 days without firing a shot.
Well, when you put it that way, Brooks, it gives a whole new outlook on the panoramic view of all of this.
That's
So
what I do.
I think it's really important for people to remember that they have to be able to see these things from a higher perspective so that they can see more of what's at play here. And you're absolutely right. If we look back, we see all the protests happening. Everything was starting to bubble up. Our media here was censored to the degree that we didn't really know there was protests going on until we got online and looked it up for ourselves. And it speaks to the power of media, and it speaks to the power of censorship online. You know, when you look at the Chinese, you're right. We were talking a little bit about this before we started recording here, how it's not necessarily all Chinese people or the Chinese culture.
Oh, yeah. Right.
It's the Chinese government that is pushing censorship and control and the use of technologies that, if were to be implemented here, hopefully we would have some serious protests.
Well, they're working on it. The whole idea of social scoring, of that your cell phone is integrally linked to your, not just your credit score, but your social score. What kind of expression do you have on your face? What kind of friends have you visited? What kind of websites have you gone to? What kind of, clothes do you wear? Have you dissented against the government? All of these things go into your social score in China. Now, the Chinese people are smart. What they did is they got more than one cell phone. Sometimes some people had 3 or 4 cell phones. Why? So they could have 3 or 4 lives. They could have the government one. This phone stays at home because they're tracking that phone. But this other phone is going to go with me. Now, what proof do I have? Because after Operation Corona Scare had run its course in Wuhan, China lost 21 million cell phone numbers. 21 million cell phones went inactive. These were all the extra phones that the dissidents, the people who were living alternate lifestyles inside China, had to give up because they were tracked. Those numbers went away. It wasn't 21 million people died. It was 21 million cell phones that disappeared. We're getting there here. Right now we have what I call a slave score, which is your FICA score. It says that if you have the right amount of debt, not too much, not too little, and you're paying that debt on time, you're a good slave. But if you are successful, like me, I worked my whole life until I was 52 or 53 years old. I finally made enough money I could live within my means. I paid all my debts off. I didn't need a credit card anymore. I didn't buy anything on time. I owned everything. If I wanted it, I bought it. I have a crappy credit score because I don't obey the slave model. I'm not in debt. I don't maintain debt. I don't have to worry about making payments. I don't have any. You've got to have the right amount of payments in order to be a good risk for the community. And they judge you based on that. Now, we're not to the extent China is. China grades you on, whether you go to church, what religion you are, what foods you eat, whether you're overweight, whether you hang with people that play bridge or speak English. All that stuff grades you. And the people, they're smart. Believe me, most of my graduating class in nuclear chemistry, they were Chinese. They were all smart people. And they know what it's like to be free. They know what liberty feels like. And they don't like the Chinese government.
Setting a pretty large precedent, I think, to look at the East and see how their technology is going to work, their facial recognition technology, their phones, and, come over here to the West, and we're supposed to be this free country that can do what they want, come here for the American dream. I know it is, it's funny. And over the years that we've been conditioned to have a cell phone, to depend on a cell phone, if you think about the way business has transferred over to being online, most businesses now are dependent on the internet and dependent on the online presence. And have we been conditioned to be here? Is this part of the phase of going into what we're headed into, do you think?
I think it could be a good thing, though, because, when the Homestead Act happened in the late 1800s and people charged across the mossy meadows to establish their homesteads, they didn't live in neighborhoods to begin with. They were quite separated one from another. Lifespans were low, innovation was low. But once we started to coagulate as communities, we began diversifying the needs of the community: water treatment, food growth, health care, education, everything began diversifying. We became a much more functional community. Now our community a lot of it is virtual. And to tell you the honest truth, it's an upgrade for me because I'm 65 years old. But for the next generation, they're hardwired to it. And I think it's a good thing. I think being able to share our thoughts virtually like we are with the whole world right now here with this technology is a marvelous thing. And I think that every major disease will shortly be cured. Our energy needs will be solved. But we've got to get past this ruler class that thinks they have to run the world. It has to go away.
I think you're right. I think that is the answer to it. Because innovation and technology isn't going anywhere. And it does enable us to be free in our expression, which is a universal human right? Mm-hmm. And yet we have this entity of sorts that is bent on controlling and militarizing that sort of technology so that it can force its agendas. What do you think about the vaccine topic on the coronavirus?
It's a red herring. I think all biology is molecular. So if you develop a vaccine against a macrophage, let's just say my little R2D2 here is the macrophage. We're going to develop a vaccine against the most important part of this macrophage, which is this square base. So if a virus shows up in our body, and we have about, 1 trillion of them in our body in any given moment, if it shows up with this square base, you're going to build antibodies against it and destroy it. But what happens if the virus gets smart or mutates or another virus comes along and has a round base? Well, we're sick all over again. And now we got this virus, which, by the way, is designed to create an antibody response in our body. And sometimes what they do is they kind of nuke that virus so it goes into our body. It doesn't actually get us sick. It just makes our immune system think we're sick. But sometimes it doesn't do a very good job. It doesn't make us think we're sick enough. So we only get one phase of the immune response. We don't get the other 3 phases. We don't actually build an antibody in our system against that. So they enhance it. They put mercury and they put other things in it to irritate the body and make the body say, oh yeah, now we're really mad. We're really going to go after this virus. But the metals are all poisonous to us. And when you do that with every single virus that you have, you end up a very poisoned individual and you never get rid of those heavy metals. I think the vaccines, especially for this particular virus, is a red herring. This virus has, believe it or not, coronaviruses have been around since the dawn of time, has a macrophage that's very easily interrupted. Once you interrupt the macrophage or interrupt the RNA sequencing in your body, it can't replicate. If it can't replicate, the macrophage only lasts once it hits a biological system, it only lasts about 8 hours, and the macrophage falls apart. Now, what happens is normally it relies on our cells, our epithelial cells, which line our eyes and our nose and lungs and bowel and everything, because they're really rapidly growing. They rely on those epithelial cells to be the factory to make more of the macrophages. But if you take hydrochloroquine or you take some of these plasma antibodies, it interrupts that protein. That protein cannot replicate, so no casing ever gets built. The coronavirus is incomplete. The Death Star is not operational, and it just flushes out of the body in a matter of hours. It's easy to stop. Easy.
So why is the conversation centered around how deadly this virus is, and we better be afraid, and look how many people it's killed? Why is the messaging consistent with the opposite of the facts of how the body works?
Well, again, it goes back to this military objective. When you consider your operational environment and you consider the assets that you have at your disposal, and the global syndicate has at its disposal the global media empire. All 6 major media moguls are heavily, heavily invested into by the Chinese. So if the Chinese tell the media, look, when you put your news on tonight, the lower third, you know what the lower third is, right? It's the title page at the bottom of the screen. The lower third is going to contain the words coronavirus pandemic. Everybody's is going to contain that. And it's going to be in big red letters. We think, yes, the Arial font will do it. And we're going to drive it into people's consciousness in every language all over the world. And within 7 days, we're going to have people so scared that they're not going to venture outside of their homes. And we're going to force the governments to close all businesses. Otherwise, it's because they want people to die. Exactly the opposite. They want people to die. In the book Charm of Favor, I talk about an actual nuclear weapon going off. And they use the death toll of the weapon to beat up the leadership of the world. You see, they let this happen. Well, they didn't blow it up. President Trump didn't have a darn thing to do with coronavirus, but you see him getting the blame for every single death. I actually heard a lawmaker yesterday saying every death certificate from coronavirus should have President Trump's signature on it. That's the goal, Hillary. That's the real goal of this operation.
So this is about a political agenda to destabilize our leadership structure at a vulnerable time when we have elections coming up. And it really is just that simple.
It's allowing them to pick up where they left off. You see, in 2016, they thought they had it won. Every model they had showed that Hillary Clinton was going to win 95% of the vote. Why break a sweat? Why have a bunch of rallies and worry about it when all the models were saying she's going to win by 95%? They lost control. Everything they had been building since 1992, when Bill Clinton repealed the Glass-Steagall last part of it and allowed the banks to merge with the brokerage houses, and they started breaking down the banking system, pushing it more and more and more global. They had it all set up. Everything was ready to hand over. And the military stepped in and put their candidate in and said, no, 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 no. We're going to save America. We're going to make America great again. Well, it's been 4 years, and they've tried everything they can. We're now in, let's just call it, impeachment show season 6. That's what we're in right now.
I have to laugh when you say that and think about all of the signs we had along the years that this is where we were heading. And I was watching the 2016 election very carefully. I was hosting a political podcast during that time as well. So I was very curious about the fact that Trump was brought on to Alex Jones's show and spoke to the millions of people that Alex had. And I listened, and he was speaking the speak of the New World Order and the things that millions and millions of people around the world were already in touch with because of the alternative media and the access to information. And yet they never once acknowledged that. If anything, they ignore it. And they push the Russians swayed this and that, and everybody starts believing it's the Russians, and then we're supposed to hate the Muslims, and then we hate the Russians. And it's always this constant barrage of who is our enemy.
Yeah.
And the language speaks really hard to being at war and wartime powers and industries switching over production to make masks, which we're not even really sure we're supposed to be wearing until we're told it's mandated, because there's so many conflicting opinions out there about what's supposed to be happening.
I only wear them in the plant because it's required, but I don't wear them anywhere else.
Well, if there's a shortage, why are we being told to all wear them? And we have 3 days to get some.
Yeah. And by the way, the masks, they're only good for 1 day, so you can't wear a mask for the whole week. Now, it used to fascinate me whenever I traveled in China, you would see people wearing masks. But in their culture, if you had a cold, you wore a mask so that if you coughed, if you sneezed, you didn't infect the rest of the community. It was kind of an act of protecting the community from you. And they've switched the whole thing now. You're now trying to protect yourself from the community. And
I think that's where we're headed, Brooks. Do you think we're headed to a Chinese-like culture where
no,
we wear masks if we have a cold and we stay 6 feet apart and we travel differently and interact differently? Or is this something that's temporary?
it's temporary, and I'll tell you why, because you cannot imprison a free people. Once people have tasted of the rights that are God-given, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of expression, you can't just take them away. It takes a really, really big event to do that. I mean, we gave up our freedom to move about, and we allowed the TSA to come in and strip search us in the airport. But that took a big punch in the gut, and we're really still not sure where that punch in the gut came from. But we know this, that whole thing, all the NDAA and all the Patriot Act, it was written years before. And they were going to implement it no matter who won the White House.
It's hard for some people to believe that, But and then we enter conspiracy theory land. Let's talk about that for a moment. Conspiracy theories. So now it's a label that you get if you start to ask questions and you don't quite believe the official narrative. And conspiracy theories, fact or fiction, what do we do?
Well, I mean, when you use the word theory around a scientist, you get a whole different reaction. In the scientific method, the first thing that we do is ask questions. Then we formulate a hypothesis about the way we think this is happening or the way we don't think it's happening. And then we design experiments to gather data to prove or disprove that hypothesis. If we can gather enough data, sometimes it's not possible, but most of the time it is, we can disprove that hypothesis, and sometimes we can develop a theory based upon that proven or disproven hypothesis. When you use the word like, theory of evolution or conspiracy theory, you attach the word theory to it. You're assuming that the hypothesis has been proposed, that all the data has been collected, and the hypothesis has been proved or disproved. That hasn't happened at all. There's no such thing as conspiracy theory. In fact, conspiracy would actually be very scientific to say, wait a minute, I see a pattern here. That's very scientific. And then conduct some experiments to see if that is or is not true. Well, as soon as you start putting what we call connecting the dots, that's when the people that have put forth this idea go into defense mode. And you've probably had it happen to you. I certainly have to me. These, we call them bots. They come out of nowhere with 8 or 9 followers, and they sound very authoritative. And they say, you're a crackpot. You don't know what you're talking about. What about this? What about that? Well, now we're wise to them. We realize, dude, that's not even your picture. You're probably from India or China, and you have 8 followers. And who are your followers? They're other bots. And they're all created by these bot companies that push these narratives. Now we're wise to it. But 5 years ago, we were very manipulated by that stuff. Very.
I can speak to that, and I have noticed it. And I think that anybody who knows my work long enough knows that that has definitely popped up on many platforms. And it's a real thing, and it's not something to just, it's not paranoia. I mean, it can be proven. You can prove that these things are real. Speaking to that, then do you think that it's kind of like the UFO culture? You believe in UFOs, you're crazy, and they do the same kind of label action. If you're a UFO conspiracy theorist, well, now you're a conspiracy theorist if you even question the narrative, no matter what it is. And I think we have to be careful to put that onto others, because I've watched real people fall into the trap of believing that conspiracy theorist is one of the most negative labels you can put on somebody.
Hmm.
And if you start seeing that, they tend to stay away and disconnect and tell their friends, and everything starts to kind of move away from what we're trying to share. And some of those sharings are very true. And we need to ponder these ideas and questions, and critical thinking and freedom of opinion is a universal human right. And we have a right to question and talk about things this way.
Sure we do. Sure we do.
So
I mean, when you talk about, UFOs, there's a lot of data. There's a lot of irrefutable data that they do exist, unidentified flying objects. The next set of questions is a little bit more esoteric. Like, okay, UFOs exist. Now, here's 3 questions that a scientist would ask. So it has been observed, say an F-18 Super Hornet chased one and got it on a gun camera film, and that film leaked out and people saw it. So it does exist, and the F-18 couldn't keep up with it. The next 3 questions are, is it from here or is it from somewhere else? And the next question is, who's flying it? Is it a human flying it, a future human, a past human, or an alien race flying it? And the third question is probably even more profound. Where did it go? Where is it now? There's about 100,000 UFOs any given month noticed all over the world. Where are they? Are they outside your house? Are they on the White House lawn? No, they wouldn't be there because there's no intelligent life there. But maybe they're under the polar caps. Maybe they're inside the planet. Maybe they're on the bottom of the ocean. Maybe they're interdimensional and they can just disappear from physical form and then come back. These are great questions, and we need data.
Would be a worthy thing. Now, Trump put into effect this Space Force. What are your thoughts on the Space Force in regards to the alien?
Well, I'm not currently wearing my Space Force hat, but I do have my Space Force pin.
I want one.
I can tell you, I just wrote a book. I just published it last month. It's called Asteroid Mining, The Future of Energy. And it is the current state of affairs for asteroid mining, moon mining, and what we call cislunar, cis-Mars. And I have 3 sections on the Space Force. I went to Trump Tower. I've got all the information that I can on the legislation and why it was put in place, why the executive order was made the way it was made. And the best idea that I can come up with is our administration, the Trump administration, is trying to unleash the next gold rush. Now, it's been wanting to do this for a long time, but it has been primarily driven by governments. China has been sending several probes to the moon. India just recently tried and splatted on the moon. They didn't make it. It's much more complex than it sounds, because you can't very easily send a probe to the moon because the gravity field is very lumpy. It's very difficult to fly by wire a drone from here and land it on the moon. It's just not easy to do. And miscalculations were made, and the Indian probe splattered on the moon at about 300 miles an hour, and that's the end of that. But if you have a human at the controls, then you can fly it to the ground. It's a lot easier to do with a good pilot. We're not there. We haven't returned to that point yet because of the solar radiation that we're seeing in our solar system, and the activity of the Van Allen radiation belts is not like it was in the late 60s. In the late 60s, there was a big lull in the magnetosphere, and it was actually possible to punch through it with shielded humans and not have them be exposed to high radiation. You can't do that now. Now the Van Allen radiation belt is enormous. It's like 900 to 1,000 miles.
Why has it increased?
It changes all the time, but it
fluctuates to what?
It fluctuates based on solar radiation, which right now we are at a solar minimum that we have not ever seen before. The sun is not putting out coronal mass ejections like it normally does, but it puts out a very consistent form of radiation, which does not build up our atmosphere, but it messes with our magnetosphere big time. So our atmosphere is much thinner than it used to be by several miles. And this has a lot of effects. First of all, it doesn't affect our satellites very much. Satellites that should have aged 10 years ago are still up there because they're not dragging against the atmosphere because the atmosphere is thinned so much. The second thing that happens is solar radiation goes right through the atmosphere and strikes the Earth. So in the summertime, you get a tremendous amount of infrared radiation and the ground heats up and you get these record temperatures. But in the wintertime, when we're in the shady side of the sun, or shady side of the Earth cools off and loses its energy to space at a much higher rate. So we get colder winters and warmer summers. And Earth can't take too much of that. It sets up thermal oscillations that are...
Now, why isn't that part of the climate change conversation that everybody loves to fight over?
Because they don't listen to my program. But there are books being written about it now. They're a little behind the curve.
I'm serious. It's a serious question. If you are who you are, there's other people that you associate with. And I mean, why can't we have this conversation? The sun affects our atmosphere affects
Oh, yeah.
ours. And it's not so much that, we went and bought this or that, or it's our fault.
Plastic bags at the grocery store.
There's this massive guilt messaging that goes towards human beings, and we feel so shamed that we're ruining our planet. Yet
all climate change roads lead to socialism. That's an easy thing to, and if the climate change doesn't work, that's no problem. We can come up with a virus that can do it too. All those roads lead to socialism. So once you open your eyes to that, the rest of it makes total sense. As I told you, I'm a scientist. I look at data, and I'm a professional statistician. I have been for a long time. This is the biggest benefit that I bring to the Fortune 500. And the worst thing that I see all the time is bad data collection, bad data treatment. And the whole climate change argument is bad data collection and bad data treatment. And it's done with an agenda which really, as a scientist, pisses me off.
Well, you're not alone in that. People need to understand how the sun connects to our world.
Yeah.
And how we're connected interstellarly. Cosmic consciousness is much more opening than just Earth consciousness or what's happening in our own little worlds, right?
We do think about end of the world scenarios all the time. My birth trilogy is an end of the world scenario, but is end of the world in a good way, I guess, because that schism I was telling you about the human race dividing, eventually it gathers. They gather into two groups, and the planet actually begins to divide. It comes into an energetic half and a sort of mortal half. The Earth, in essence, gives birth to a new Earth. That's where the whole idea of birth came from. And I think, at least in an esoteric way, that is what's happening to the planet right now. Fortunately or unfortunately, we're homogenized. We're all mixed together in the communities. We haven't actually, moved to safe cities and unsafe cities. Right now, there are 200 cities in 28 states that are considered, quote, sanctuary cities. And they've become very unsafe for our republic. There's a lot of illegal voting. There's a lot of money laundering. There's a lot of graft and corruption and bribery, child trafficking. It's horrible. And the other states, the 21 states that are thinking of going another way, I think we have 21 states and 29 states. That's where it boils down to right now. That's pretty close to even. But you know what we call that, Hillary? We call that a civil war. And I think that's what we're experiencing right now. Doesn't have the guns yet. Well, it does have the guns, but I can tell you right now, if we were the problem, you'd know about it. We're not the problem.
The technology that's being used in the coronavirus is very interesting. What do you think of the contact tracing apps that are coming out?
Well, CRISPR, it was actually developed by a gamer. He worked for, I can't remember the name now, but they ended up selling the company because the chromosomal modeling, amino acid modeling capability of his gaming software was actually matched up with a replicator of sorts, like you think about in Star Trek. You can actually create genes using the CRISPR. It's an acronym. And you can use this technology to build functional groups and insert them through what's called mechanochemistry. We have used scanning tunneling microscopes to do this quite effectively. You can actually move the functional groups around on a gene one atom at a time. It's time consuming, but once the molecule has been created and the computer can do it in, as fast as a computer can work, then you can put it into a macrophage that's enzymatically compatible with a biological system like a mouse or a rabbit or a pig or a human, and you can make more virus. It was funded by DARPA, and the breakthroughs were written up as cures for things like diabetes and lupus and things like that, because these were genetic therapies. I myself have benefited from this kind of therapy, where new genes are put into viruses. Those viruses are inserted into the body. The viruses go exactly where they're programmed to go. The new genetic materials put into the cells, and the cells change their genetics, and they change their functionality, and it's saving lives. But it can also be used for weaponry. And that's what DARPA was really interested in. That's why they funded it. Now, the universities used it for good, but the mechanism, the CRISPR mechanism that allowed them to craft custom biomolecules was perfected at that level. And I'm afraid we're to the point now, or very close to it, where we can produce a weapon that could be genetically specific. It could remove a certain gene marker from the planet. It could seek them out and kill them.
Let me just take a deep breath and let that all settle in. And I know people watching this are probably going to need to take a deep breath right now and let that sink in. The truth of it is it's real. I'm familiar with the CRISPR technology, and I have to say it was one of the first things that popped into my mind when I started to see the corona and how they're handling not only the testing aspect, but it's like innovative technology that they're using to track how a virus spreads. And we've already started to see preliminary reports where certain genetics, certain populations are more affected than other populations. And, people always say to me, well, why are you so against a vaccine? Why are you so upset about it? Why can't you just take it like everybody else and support the health crisis? And I say to them, because you're not aware of what I'm aware of. Yeah. And you haven't seen what I've seen, and you haven't read what I've read. And if you did, you would then have serious concerns. So the contact tracing, that's happening with our phones and technology, is that part of a bigger picture of collecting data on who we're actually interacting with and how far we spread this thing, or is there a more nefarious agenda afoot?
It can be. Of course, most phones now, you have some ability to turn on and off that technology. And if they want to, I guess they could force it back on. But it is true, especially if you're using things like Apple Pay, or you're storing your payment systems on your phone, because I like to use cash. And I'll tell you why. Because, when I go buy green beans at the market, I don't want them knowing that I buy the store brand or the name brand. I buy my vegetables anonymously. And it's just the principle for me. But my kids and their kids, they're perfectly happy with a debit card. And if they didn't have to carry a debit card, just their phone, that would make it even easier. Now, when I go to the movies, I see a lot of people, and the airplane, I see a lot of people using their phone to scan that ticket. A lot of information is gathered at that moment. Where you are, when you are, where you're going, and even when you get there, what car you rent, what hotel you stay at, what movies you watched, what meals you ate, who you met with, because other phones you're close to. All of this information can be gathered and profiled. Is it important? Yeah. If you commit a crime, they're going to know, where did you come from? Who are you meeting with? Where did you live? Which store did you shop at? What supplies did you buy? They're going to want to know all that stuff. I would if I was investigating a crime. But what if you're not committing a crime? What if you're maybe even just thinking about committing? Or what if you're just randomly fit the pattern of someone who would commit a crime? Now you got something much more dangerous. Now you have something that is much more controlling. And that's where China is right now. And China is spreading that technology to Africa in a very aggressive way. And they're spreading it to Venezuela as we speak right now. It's called Dragon technology. And it will very soon start making its way into the United States. It'll start first with companies. You work for Boeing, we want to know all about you. You work for Raytheon, you work for Grumman, you work for NASA, we're going to want to know all about you. It will start there, and then it will expand out.
So despite all of this, we've been talking about a lot of heavy-duty things. What is the lighter silver lining of all of this, and what should we hope for as we wrap it up?
There is hope, because we're a free people, and we're a free and intelligent people. And I am still optimistic that very soon we will cure every major disease. Every major congenital disease that we have right now, diabetes, lupus, polio, ALS, all of those diseases are going to be cured because we're going to understand them on a molecular basis. That opens up great frontiers for the human race. Now, what I would like to see is a more educated human race. And this is probably the most hopeful thing. One of the great things that's come out of Operation Corona Scare is that we have learned that government education is not essential.
Hey, I just heard a ding. And that ding for me is always universe saying, right on.
Absolutely. You have the best school ever in the history of mankind right here. All you have to do is sit in this desk, discipline yourself, and go through the courses. And you will learn much faster and much better information than any college professor. You might still have to do the lab work. I highly recommend that. But I think universities, and especially K through 12, they have lost their franchise on education forever.
I have to agree with you on that. I've seen that coming a long time ago. Maybe we can just download and become ninjas. And we can all be living in a world of ninjas.
Yeah, well, knowledge ain't wisdom. So you get a lot of knowledge, but you got to have the wisdom for how to use it.
That's right. Thank you so much, Brooks, for sitting down and talking with me today. And I hope everybody gains something. So how can people reach you if they have more questions or would like to read your books or listen to your
readings? That's the easiest thing in the world. Just go to brooksagnew.com, brooksagnew.com. That's just my name. And everything that I do, everything that I write, all the places I'm appearing, every place you can listen to me online is all right there. Everything's connected. Really, really easy to do.
Wonderful. And thank you again for being here. And thank you, everybody. Please share this. Send it around. Let's go viral in a good way and share the news and the information.
That's right. When you catch this, you're cured.
Bye, everyone.